What if the you that everyone knows isn't the real you at all? Think about it. Does your partner truly know the depths of your inner mind? Do your friends and coworkers see the unfiltered version of you or just the carefully crafted persona you've handed them? Because the scary truth is, 80% of people admit to changing their personality depending on who they're around. Let's be honest, we all wear masks. Some for protection, some for approval, some just to survive. But what's even worse, the longer we wear a mask, the harder it becomes to remember what's underneath. So who are you really? And more importantly, do you even know? For years, I felt like I didn't know myself. Not because I didn't want to, but because my existence became shaped by who everyone else needed me to be. But that became draining. So I had to start being the person I needed to be for me. If you've ever felt like you're playing a character in your own life, then this video is for you. And today, I'm going to share the science behind masking, the trauma behind perfection, and the steps that help me reclaim my authenticity and my life, so you can too. 68% of people admit to silencing their true opinions just to keep the peace. We edit ourselves every day by smiling when we don't want to, nodding when we want to disagree, swap out our real thoughts for whatever version won't start a fight, cost us our respect, or get us labeled as too much. But what happens when staying safe starts to feel like you're slowly disappearing? Let me ask you this. Do you ever catch yourself changing how you act just to fit in or avoid conflict? That's impression management, a psychological term for tweaking your personality, words, or even your style to control what people think of you. We all do it sometimes, like laughing at a joke that wasn't funny, downplaying your wins so others don't feel threatened, or posting only the perfect moments online. But when this becomes automatic, that's when you really have a problem because you've basically lost yourself. Let's go back to where the masking begins, in our childhoods. Because if you grew up in an environment where love was conditional based upon your behavior, performance, or silence, you learned early on that being yourself wasn't always safe. Maybe you were the good kid, the quiet one, or the responsible one. But were you allowed to be angry, to disagree, or to say no? The way we were treated as children becomes the blueprint for how we relate to others and ourselves as adults. Over time, this programs you to disconnect from your authentic feelings in exchange for approval, and it's been shown that children praised for achievements over their authenticity often develop what's called a false self, which is a version of themselves shaped to meet others' expectations and not their own values. And that false self doesn't just go away when you grow up. You carried it into your friendships, your workplace, your relationships, and even with yourself. Let's talk about social media. It was supposed to connect us, but instead, it has become a stage where we perform life that doesn't really exist. For example, 64% of Gen Z admitted to creating their online persona to look more put together than they actually feel. I know this one personally. Back in the day, when I was on social media, I felt pressure to always be posting the right photos, the right words, and keeping up an image. But it got exhausting, and I ended up deactivating my account and never returned. Because even then, I could see the toll it was taking on my well-being. Because social media teaches us that it's better to be admired than understood. But that's a recipe for chronic emptiness because you can't feel fulfilled by a life that's not even yours. And let's not forget about the 9 to 5 mask we wear. It's been reported that 61% of employees admit that they downplay their quirks or creativity to appear more professional. We're told to be neutral, to not stand out or stand up for ourselves, or that's the end of our job. But when professionalism requires personality suppression, that's no longer workplace culture, it's conformity. These unspoken rules that convince us to tone it down, speak only when asked, smile when you disagree, are just polished ways of saying don't be too much and don't be too real. Over time, that self-abandonment begins to show up as burnout, imposter syndrome, and even quiet quitting. Because people become tired with living a lie for 8 hours a day. It's important to know we wear masks not because we're inauthentic, but because we're trained to associate authenticity with rejection, shame, loss, or judgment. But the real danger isn't being too much, it's spending your life being someone you're not. Now, let's talk about what really happens when we spend years wearing a mask, pretending to be someone we're not. We're taught to mold ourselves to be the helper, the achiever, the strong one, and the likable one. But after years of masking, you start to forget who you would be if you weren't trying to be accepted. This is called identity confusion, a psychological state where your sense of self becomes fractured and unclear. And it's not just for teenagers. Adults feel this way all the time, especially those healing from trauma or people pleasing. Carl Rogers, the founder of humanistic psychology, called this gap between your real self and your ideal self. And the wider that gap gets, the more likely you are to experience anxiety, depression, and self doubt. Because a mask doesn't just conceal your face, it silences your truth. You know what's draining? Faking your emotions all day. And in psychology, this is called emotional labor. It's when you have to manage or hide your true emotions to meet social expectations. And psychologically, it's straining because suppressing your emotions increases cortisol, the stress hormone, by 37%. So if you've ever come home from a normal day feeling numb, drained, or like you need a glass of wine just to feel human again, it might not be the job. It might just be the mask tiring you out because your nervous system wasn't designed to act 24/7. Want to know something crazy about masking? You could be surrounded by a group of people and still feel completely alone. This is called the loneliness paradox, which is basically feeling disconnected despite having relationships. And this happens because those connections are based on the version of you that performs, not the one that truly exists. Because it has been shown that people who suppress their authenticity in relationships are 3 times more likely to report chronic loneliness, even if they're socially active. Think about that. You can be out with your friends smiling and nodding and still feel unseen because no one is looking at you. They're looking at the mask you put on to survive. If your worth has always been tied to what you do, how well you perform, how helpful you are, then you'll start to believe that just being is not enough. And this is how the false self forms. You become a version of yourself that's rewarded, but not necessarily real. Because it's been shown that kids raised with conditional approval often internalize a false self that persists into adulthood. These individuals struggle with chronic imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and constant need for external validation. Over time, the disconnect between your outer life and your inner truth creates long-term emotional tension that has significant consequences to your well-being, like anxiety from overthinking every move, every word, and every impression you make. Also, this can cause depression from feeling stuck in a life that doesn't reflect who you are, and low self-esteem from never being sure if people like you or just the character you're playing, because people who consistently suppress their identity report lower life satisfaction, higher levels of social anxiety, and increased self-alienation. Because wearing a mask might keep you safe in the short term, but long term, it costs you everything that's real. Now, let's discuss the cost of staying comfortable. We all crave comfort. It makes sense because it's predictable, familiar, and it gives a false sense of control in a world that often feels chaotic. But the truth is, comfort doesn't always bring peace, and what feels safe right now might actually be sabotaging your future. So let's break down the real cost of staying in your comfort zone. Number one, comfort rewires your brain for stagnation. Your brain is designed to conserve energy. It's called cognitive efficiency. So every time you avoid something uncomfortable, like speaking up for yourself, trying something new, or setting a boundary, your brain rewards you with relief. But the more often you avoid discomfort, the more rigid your brain becomes, and over time, your comfort zone shrinks. Neuroscience calls this synaptic pruning. The brain actually weakens the neural pathways associated with growth, risk taking, and creativity if they're not being used, because constant avoidance of discomfort correlates with reduced prefrontal cortex activity, the part of your brain responsible for decision making, long term planning, and emotional regulation. So, to sum it up, staying comfortable trains your brain to fear growth. Number two, comfort quietly breeds discontent. Think about it. When you smile even when you don't want to, or when you justify staying small so you don't attract too much attention, you still feel a pull deep within, moving you towards what you really want. But the longer you stay in a place that doesn't reflect your truth, the more uncomfortable comfort becomes. What used to feel safe now feels like a slow suffocation because unmet potential is one of the top five contributors to chronic regret and low life satisfaction, especially in women over 35. Number three, comfort versus your calling. Here's an unfortunate truth. You cannot have both comfort and answer your calling because one will always demand that you betray the other. Choosing your calling means saying no to what drains you, letting go of who you used to be, and facing fear with faith again and again. And yes, it's scary because growth never comes without grief. You will grieve the identities you outgrow, the people who you lose along the way, and the life you settle for so long. But on the other side of that grief is freedom. You don't just get what you want when you leave your comfort zone. You find out who you really are. Number four, evolution requires disruption. Let's talk biology for a second. Your nervous system was built to adapt, but it only adapts when it's challenged. Researchers have found that 15 minutes of strategic discomfort daily, just doing something outside your emotional comfort zone, lead to more neuroplasticity, emotional resilience, and even faster recovery from stress. So, the very discomfort you avoid is the exact thing you need for your evolution to begin. Number five, your calling won't always feel like rainbows and sunshine because finding your purpose is not always glamorous. Your calling won't always feel good. It won't always feel clear either, but it will always feel true. And when you follow that truth, no matter how confusing it may seem initially, you'll start to become that person you were meant to be and not the one who you were told to be. I want you to ask yourself, what is my comfort zone costing me? What version of me will never be born if I don't change? Who will I be if I stop choosing easy and start choosing alignment? Remember, comfort keeps you small, quiet, and the same. I don't think you ever find yourself. I believe you begin to remember who you were before the world told you to be someone else. And if you've been wearing a mask for so long that you don't even know who you really are anymore, this section is your blueprint to uncovering the real person beneath the mask. Step 1. Self-awareness. You can't heal what you're still hiding. Ask yourself, where am I performing? What parts of me feel like roles instead of real? When do I shrink myself to stay safe? This isn't to cause you shame. It's about helping you recognize. Because you can't be your true self if you're still loyal to your survival self. Because until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. Step 2. Embrace the uncool. Most of us have learned that being different is dangerous. So we edited ourselves, smoothed out our edges, and learned to mask to be likable instead of real. But when you stop trying to be accepted and start embracing your quirks and weirdness, you start to feel better about yourself. Because this triggers reward pathways in your brain, increasing dopamine and long-term self-esteem. So start small, but whatever you do, start. Every time you choose truth over approval, your nervous system learns that it can be real and still be safe. Step 3. Set authenticity boundaries. You've heard of physical boundaries, But let's talk about identity boundaries. They help you keep your authenticity intact. And they sound like you saying things like, I'm not pretending to like that anymore. I don't shrink myself to keep the peace. And I'm not available for things that cost me my truth. Because people who set clear identity boundaries report 2 times higher self worth and lower cortisol levels. Step 4. Find authentic relationships because you cannot heal in environments that suppress your truth. The goal isn't to be loved by everyone, it's to be fully seen by a few because people with 2 or more authentic relationships are 2.5 times more resilient, 3 times less likely to suffer from depression, and more likely to reach their personal goals. So if someone only loves you when you're wearing a mask, do they really love you? Step 5. Practice identity detachment. Most of us don't just wear a mask, we have become it. And letting go of that identity can feel like grief because, in a way, it is. You will mourn the version of you who played nice, stayed quiet, and who fitted in. But you will also meet the version of you who's powerful and free. This is called identity transformation, where you stop living by inherited scripts and start writing your own. Step 6. Repetition rewires your reality. Real changes isn't just insight, it's putting it into practice. Repeating new behaviors like speaking up, setting boundaries, choosing rest, being real, it activates neuroplasticity. And this is the science of becoming because consistent identity based action, even when uncomfortable, rewires emotional associations in the brain. So show up real, even when it's scary, because with every repetition, your brain is learning this is who I am now. I want you to know you don't need to find your voice. It was never lost. It was just buried under years of trying to be what everyone else needed. Now, it's your turn to need you. You owe yourself the truth. Let's get this clear. Your brain doesn't just change by thinking it. It changes by doing consistently. So if you've been living in survival mode, people pleasing, or chronic self-abandonment, it's because your brain was trained to believe that the mask equals safety. But safety isn't your purpose. So let's rewire that. Step 1. Use identity-based habits, not outcome-based. Most people say, I want to lose weight or I want to stop people pleasing. But here's the problem. Outcomes don't stick unless they match your identity. True behavior change is identity change. So start saying I am statements that are tied to action like, I'm someone who chooses peace over performance. I'm someone who speaks up even when I'm afraid. Because people who rooted their behavior change in identity are 3 times more likely to sustain new habits long term. Step 2. Repeat, rewire, and reinforce. Your brain loves repetition. It doesn't care if something isn't true. It cares if it's familiar. That's why trauma responses can feel more natural than peace because they've been repeated and reinforced. But you can change this. In fact, it has been shown that it takes approximately 66 days for a new behavior to form new neural pathways when coupled with emotional reinforcement. Step 3. Anchor growth in the body. You cannot rewire your mind without involving the body because trauma is stored somatically. Your nervous system remembers what your mind tries to forget. So implement practices like breath work, somatic journaling, which is asking where do I feel this in my body, and safe movement like walking, dancing, or stretching, which helps signal to your brain I am safe because combining movement with intentional reflection increases neural integration, which means your mind and body start syncing up again. Step 4. Visualize the new you and practice being them. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a memory and a vivid visualization. That's why athletes rehearse wins in their minds before they compete, and you can do the same. So close your eyes. Picture your most authentic, grounded, unapologetic version of yourself. How do you walk in a room? How do you handle conflict? What do you no longer tolerate? Now practice being this person. Try it for at least 5 minutes a day. Eventually, it won't be practice because visualization and identity based affirmations rewire the prefrontal cortex for confidence, helping you to gain more authority in your life. The longer you pretend to be someone you're not, the more you postpone the life that is yours. Let me leave you with this. There was a time when I couldn't tell you what I liked, what I wanted, or who I really was. Not because I lacked intelligence or ambition, but because I had abandoned myself so many times trying to be what everyone else saw me as, with my mask. It took me years before I finally asked the question that changed my life. What if the life that I want will only be available when I stop pretending to be someone I'm not? So I stopped performing and started becoming the authentic version of myself. And by doing that, I learned that the cost of authenticity is high, but the cost of denying yourself is even higher. You will lose some people, but you'll finally find yourself. So imagine two versions of you, one who stays the same, comfortable, agreeable, and hidden, or the one who risks the unknown, speaks up, and owns their truth. Now ask yourself, which one would I be proud to meet in 10 years? So take off the mask and be that person today. Let me know in the comments, what old version of yourself are you finally ready to release? And remember, it's time to take off your mask and show the world the real you. Until next time, take care.